In this episode, we're going to take something almost everyone uses every day, email, and make the underlying protocols feel a lot less mysterious. Even people who are comfortable with computers often treat email like a magic pipe where messages just appear, but the reality is that email is a chain of different systems handing responsibility to each other. When you understand that chain, a lot of security stories start to make sense, like why phishing works so well, why spoofing is still a problem, and why some attacks don't need malware at all. We'll focus on three core protocols you'll hear constantly in security work: SMTP, IMAP, and POP, and we'll connect them to the places criminals typically poke at email systems. The goal is not to turn you into an email administrator, but to give you a clear mental model you can use to reason about risks, logs, and common failure modes. To build that model, it helps to start with the basic idea that email is not one protocol doing one job, but a few protocols each handling a different step in a delivery workflow. The sending side is mainly about moving a message from the sender's environment into the broader email ecosystem, and the receiving side is mainly about letting a user access what has arrived for them. Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP, is the workhorse for sending and relaying messages between mail servers, and it's built around the idea of handing off a message to the next system that can move it closer to its destination. Internet Message Access Protocol, IMAP, and Post Office Protocol, POP, are mostly about retrieval, meaning how a user's email app gets messages out of a mailbox. When you separate those roles in your head, a lot of confusion clears up because many people assume the same protocol handles both sending and reading, and that misunderstanding can cause bad security assumptions. Now let's zoom in on what SMTP really does, because it sits at the heart of many email security problems. SMTP is a conversation between systems where one side says, in effect, "I have a message for this recipient," and the other side decides whether it will accept responsibility for it. A key design detail is that SMTP was created in an era when the internet was smaller and trust was higher. So the protocol is built to deliver mail reliably, not to guarantee that the sender identity is truthful. In practice, that means SMTP can move a message successfully even if the message claims to be from someone it is not. Modern systems add layers of authentication and validation around SMTP, but the protocol's core job is still to move messages, not to prove identity. That's why the security story for email often feels like adding locks to a door that was originally built for convenience. Another useful way to think about SMTP is to imagine a chain of relay points, where each relay is responsible for the next hop, not the entire journey. When you send a message, it typically goes from your email client to an outgoing mail server. Then it may traverse one or more relays, and eventually it reaches the recipient's incoming mail server. Each server makes decisions based on its own policies, like whether it trusts the connecting server, whether the sender looks suspicious, and whether the destination domain is local or remote. That relay behavior is important because attacks can exploit weak links in the chain, like a poorly configured relay that will forward mail for anyone. It's also important for defenders because the headers of an email message often record pieces of this journey, and learning to interpret that journey is one of the first steps in understanding how a message got to you. Even at a beginner level, knowing that email is a series of handoffs helps you reason about where trust can be lost. On the receiving side, the story shifts, because once a message has arrived at the recipient's mail server, the user still needs a way to access it. Internet Message Access Protocol, IMAP, is designed around the idea that the mailbox lives on the server and the user's devices synchronize with it. That means the server keeps the authoritative copy of messages, along with folder structures, read or unread status, and often other metadata. IMAP is popular in modern environments because it supports multiple devices cleanly, like a phone, a laptop, and a tablet all seeing the same mailbox state. From a security perspective, IMAP matters because it is a login surface exposed to the internet in many environments, and because attackers who gain valid credentials can use IMAP to quietly access or exfiltrate mail without needing to break into the mailbox storage directly. In other words, it's a protocol designed for convenience and synchronization, and convenience can also be a risk surface. Post Office Protocol, POP, is older in spirit and simpler in behavior, and that simplicity changes the risk profile. Traditionally, POP was built for a world where you connect to the server, download messages to your local machine, and then often delete them from the server. Some modern clients can be configured to keep a copy on the server, but the original design assumption is that the server is a temporary holding area, not the permanent home for your mailbox. That can reduce server storage complexity, but it also makes multi-device usage awkward and can make incident response harder because the message might not remain on the server after retrieval. From a security standpoint, POP is still a credentialed access surface, and it still can be abused if an attacker steals a username and password. But because it is less about full synchronization, an attacker's access patterns can look different, such as repeated downloads of whole mailboxes or sudden bulk retrieval that stands out if you log and monitor it properly. With those roles in mind, a beginner-friendly email map looks like this. SMTP moves mail between systems, while IMAP and POP are common ways users retrieve mail from a mailbox. The confusion comes from the fact that your email app might use SMTP for sending but IMAP for reading. So you experience email as one thing, even though the plumbing is split. Also, modern services sometimes use proprietary APIs under the hood instead of pure IMAP or POP for user access. But the security concepts still track because the core idea is the same. There is a sending pipeline that has to decide whether to accept a message, and there is a retrieval pipeline that has to decide whether to let a user access a mailbox. Attackers often pick the easiest pipeline to exploit, and that is frequently the one that depends most on identity and credentials. When you hear about email breaches, you're often hearing about either weak validation in the sending pipeline or stolen credentials in the retrieval pipeline, or both working together. One of the most common exploit themes tied to SMTP is spoofing, where the message appears to come from someone it did not. Spoofing works because email messages have multiple identity-related fields, and not all of them are equally trustworthy. For example, what the user sees in an email client, like the displayed sender name and address, can be manipulated, and the underlying transport doesn't automatically guarantee that the sender owns that address. This is why security teams talk about aligning domains, verifying sender policies, and warning users that the visible from field is not proof of authenticity. Attackers exploit this gap by crafting messages that look like they came from a trusted executive, a known vendor, or a common service, and then they lean on urgency or fear to push the victim into action. The protocol isn't evil, it's just old enough that identity assurance had to be bolted on later, and criminals take advantage of any environment where those bolts are loose. A related and historically significant issue is Open Relay, which is basically a mail server configured to forward mail for anyone on the internet. In the early days, relaying was common because networks were smaller and cooperative, but in the modern world, an open relay becomes a free mail-sending platform for spammers and criminals. If an attacker finds one, they can pump massive amounts of spam through it, making it harder to trace back to them and potentially getting the relay's IP addresses blacklisted. For defenders, this is a lesson in secure defaults and careful configuration, because a system that is helpful by default can become dangerous when exposed to hostile traffic. Even if you never run a mail server yourself, understanding the concept matters because you might see cases where an organization's legitimate mail can't reach customers because their servers got blacklisted after misconfiguration. It also matters because criminals look for misconfigurations as much as they look for software vulnerabilities, since misconfigurations are often easier to exploit. Credential theft is the big theme on the retrieval side, especially with IMAP, because the attacker doesn't need to break encryption or find a fancy exploit if they can simply log in as the user. Phishing, password reuse, and weak passwords are still major causes of mailbox compromise because email accounts are valuable, and they are often the key to resetting other passwords. Once inside, an attacker can read sensitive messages, harvest contacts, and use the account to send believable phishing to other people. They might also set up stealthy rules, like automatically forwarding certain messages or hiding replies, so that the victim doesn't notice. Even for beginners, it's important to recognize that mailbox compromise often looks like normal access at the protocol level, because the attacker is using valid credentials and standard protocols. That's why defenders look for subtle signs, like unusual login locations, unusual client types, strange access times, or sudden bulk access patterns. Another typical exploit pattern involves the idea of downgrade or weak encryption, especially when older configurations are left in place for compatibility. Many email protocols can be protected with encryption during transit, but whether encryption is required and how it is negotiated depends on configuration and policy. If encryption is optional and the environment tolerates insecure connections, attackers on a network path may attempt to interfere, forcing a connection to proceed without encryption or with weaker settings. Even when the cryptography is sound, the human reality is that organizations sometimes keep old settings around because a legacy device or application breaks otherwise. From a security point of view, the lesson is that compatibility can quietly expand the attack surface, and email is a classic example because it has to interoperate across the global internet. So when you hear about enforcing encrypted transport or disabling old protocol options, it's not just compliance noise. It's directly tied to preventing interception and credential exposure. It's also worth understanding that email is not only a messaging system, it is a content delivery system, and that makes it a natural vehicle for malware and fraud. Attackers use email to deliver malicious attachments, to link to malicious websites, or to persuade people to reveal information. The protocol doesn't execute attachments, but the ecosystem around email, including email clients, file preview features, and human behavior, creates opportunities. Many exploits are not about a technical weakness in SMTP, IMAP, or POP themselves, but about using email as the delivery mechanism for social engineering. This is why defenders talk about filtering, scanning, and sandboxing, because the goal is to stop harmful content before a user interacts with it. The protocol is the highway, but the danger is often the cargo and the driver's decision at the exit ramp. When you're thinking like a defender, it helps to connect these protocol roles to what you would want to monitor and what kinds of events might matter. On the sending side, you care about who is connecting to your mail servers, whether they are authorized, and whether they are attempting to relay to destinations they should not. You also care about patterns like unusually high sending rates, repeated failures, or strange sender domains, because those can indicate abuse or attempted compromise. On the retrieval side, you care about authentication events, like successful logins, failed logins, and changes in access patterns that could signal stolen credentials. You also care about mailbox actions that attackers commonly use for persistence, like setting forwarding destinations or creating rules that hide alerts and replies. Even without diving into vendor-specific logging, you can see how the protocol split leads to different security questions, because sending is about delivery control and anti-abuse, while retrieval is about identity, access, and behavior. A common misconception among beginners is that if an email shows a familiar name, it must have truly come from that person, and if the message landed in the inbox, it must have been vetted. In reality, name display fields are easy to manipulate, and inbox placement is a probability-based decision made by systems that balance user convenience with risk reduction. Another misconception is that encryption automatically means trust, when encryption mainly means privacy in transit, not proof of identity or safety of content. It's also easy to assume that hackers need complex exploits, when many mailbox compromises are just stolen credentials and ordinary protocol use. The good news is that once you understand the boundaries of what these protocols do and do not guarantee, you can evaluate email claims more rationally. You can separate questions of transport, identity, content safety, and user behavior, and that separation is exactly what security thinking looks like. As we wrap up, keep the mental model simple and sturdy, because it will pay off across many security topics. Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP, is the delivery and relay engine that moves messages between servers, while Internet Message Access Protocol, IMAP, and Post Office Protocol, POP, are common ways users retrieve messages from a mailbox. Many typical exploits line up cleanly with that split, with spoofing and relaying abuse on the sending side, and credential theft and stealthy mailbox access on the retrieval side. Email remains a high-value target because it sits at the center of identity and communication. So attackers don't need perfection, they just need you to trust the wrong signal or reuse the wrong password. When you approach email as a chain of handoffs and access points instead of a single magical service, you start seeing where control and verification are strong and where they are weak. That clarity is what helps you recognize risks early, whether you're reading a suspicious message or investigating how a compromise might have happened.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.